Okay, dice roll coming up. And we've got 8.
An 8. Guys, the topic we'll be discussing today is a question. Do you require your players to read the rules?
Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role-playing games. I'm Chris Salzman.
I'm Andy Rao.
And this week we are joined by Bryn Mills.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, thank you so much for coming on, Bryn. Yeah, so we were discussing just before we got on the recording just exactly how we got connected with you, and it's sort of a circuitous route. So it's my GM knows one of your players who who played in a campaign that you ran for quite some time, and so we heard about this and we needed to have you on to sort of discuss exactly what that campaign was. I'm probably gonna get the detail wrong. Am I correct that it started in 1997 and you just wrapped up recently?
That's slightly incorrect on both ends. We actually started it in April of 1996, and and it's still going strong. We're playing tonight.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing.
When it came up that you had been involved in a campaign for that long, my jaw just dropped. I feel like we're talking to the Holy Grail. Like we have in our sights that thing that every GM dreams about. This like multi-year long campaign. And so I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but I do plan to ruthlessly interrogate you about your experiences in that long campaign.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Look forward to talking about that.
Yeah, so why don't you, I guess, let's maybe start, maybe even before that, I guess. So had you run games, have you played in games, tabletop games before launching into this campaign, or was that it was this like the start of it for you?
No, so I mean, I think I was born in '73, just so we can level set on what I was doing at what age. But I think like a lot of people, I first became interested and kind of aware through those fighting fantasy books. If you guys know those, they were Games Workshop things or Games Workshop related things, very big over here in the UK. Steve Livingston and Steve Jackson and Ian Livingston. That was kind of a gateway drug for a lot of people. And you'd go and find the old red box or blue cover first edition D&D. Start playing with friends. So really, I was doing that from I guess the age of about 11. One of the very first. I'm pretty sure the very first time, in fact, I played D&D was with a guy called John, who is still one of the players in the campaign that I'm running at the moment. So we'll be playing tonight for something like our 39th consecutive. So really, through high school and college and things, I would have various campaigns. I'd run one, someone else would run one. Different kind of overlapping groups that last for a year or two.
Mm-hmm.
The exact reason that I started this particular game and campaign is probably lost to the mists of time.
Yes,
I certainly don't think that when I kind of pulled together a group of friends, and again, as usual with these things, some were pre-existing players, some were, other people and friends of friends and people who'd expressed an interest. But when we started that in '96, I don't think anyone was expected still to be doing it in the far distant future. But here we are. So it was really a continuation of the previous 12, 13 years of gaming, mostly GMing. I don't know why I'm always the GM. There's always in every circle there's one person who's the bossy one, isn't there? Or the one
we know that experience well. With this campaign, first of all, is it using D&D or something else, or your own system?
It's D&D. We started off on good old-fashioned advanced Dungeons and Dragons first edition. I think second edition must have been out by then, but we didn't have that for some reason. We ported it to 3.5. Oh gosh, I would say about 2005. But right at the start of this year, we actually did a bit of a reboot. So for the second time, for the third group of characters, we kind of realised that the current group's PCs had gone really as far as they could, and I'm sure this is something you guys, in the D&D world have come across and talked about a lot. They kind of hit that 13th, 14th level period where they're kind of demigods, and it's hard to keep a believable world going. We just finished, some really big, chewy story arcs, and we're wrapping up loose ends. And we all agreed it would be a great opportunity to draw a line, under that particular set of characters, and to do what we've done before. Start again with first level characters, but obviously in the same world in the same continuity. As we did that this time, we took the opportunity of doing that to change to 5th edition, which
Okay.
I, for one, I think most of the players are really enjoying.
That's great. The existing characters then are still sort of in and around the setting, I guess. So you've done this a couple times now. So is this the third go around, you said?
This is the third set of characters, yes.
Okay.
Now, in fact, hopefully we learned some lessons from the first time we did it.
Yeah.
Because the first time we didn't quite have the story arc in as nice a location, and we also just kind of drew a line and said, right, 14th level characters go off into the sunset.
Yeah.
Here's your first level characters. Here's the slightly contrived opening scenario that you always have to come up with to explain why these 7 disparate individuals kind of hang out together.
Yeah.
Let's go. And of course, that meant for the next, I don't know how many years, into that kind of second tranche of the campaign, there'd be constant humorous comments. Oh, well, if this is such a big problem, why don't our previous party sort it out? What are those guys doing?
Yeah.
Why didn't they ever deal with the lick they left in a cave and made a promise to and never kept? And how about that demon that was bound and we never quite... So this time what we did was, as well as going to first level, we kind of time skipped the continuity of the campaign world forward. I think we said it was 70 years in the end, which meant that the cataclysmic events that the party had been involved as part of the story arc had time to settle down, and that all of their existing characters, the human ones anyway, I think it was one elf whose whereabouts is unknown, would all be reasonably expected to have died of old age, and to have faded into myth and legend. So that's what we did this time. So it's kind of a new world, or rather, it's the same world with some logical progressions, give some scope to do some interesting things again when you've been running about the same world. And although the characters have travelled, or both the previous 2 sets of characters between them had travelled to pretty much all the major parts of the world, the main kind of anchor location in the campaign is an island probably about the size and not dissimilar to the shape of Britain, and based on a lot of kind of old Celtic and Arthurian legends as well.
That's great.
So when characters have been running about an island the size of this country for 25 years, they can get quite used to it. So it's a good opportunity to have all of the different cities and states and tribes and locations to have iterated on in historically, logically 70 years worth, and for there to be new and interesting things that have happened, and new and interesting things that have appeared and been built, in places and organisations and people for them to explore and meet, but anchored in a world that they all know really well.
Is that sort of world building? Do you do that collaboratively, or is that something that you're coming up with and sort of setting in front of them?
So I think the question about collaboration is a really good one, and I always look on the game, the whole concept of the role-playing game and the campaign we run, I think only works and people only come back every week, and I keep doing it because it really is an exercise in collaborative storytelling. While the actual geographical makeup of the world and the basics of the lore and everything are the background that I set, the level of detail and storytelling and kind of invention of background and characters, people will come up with really quite, just thinking about the current campaign, people will come up with really quite elaborate backstories, about the wretched village of Turnipford that they come from in one case, and the character's job in the lost property window of the Hobbits Amalgamated Friendly Society, which is the Thieves Guild of the city. Lost property in heavy quotation marks there. So that, people really do come up with a lot of material, a lot of background themselves. We've got a character now who's a bard, who I think we probably abused this slightly, but get him to extemporise lengthy sonnets and rhyming couplets describing what's just happened. If he wants to give, if he wants to give the maximum bardic advantage rolls,
the full bard experience.
Yeah, he has to come up with the rhyming couplets, which he does.
Nice.
It's again. So I kind of see the DM's job really as to provide the template and provide the suspension of disbelief that then people can really start to be creative and carry out their own creativity and their own world building
For sure. When I first heard about your campaign going for so long, I mean, the biggest question I had was, how do you get a group of people? I assume it's at least, I think many GMs find it hard to keep a game meeting together for more than a few months or a year at a time. So were you just kind of blessed with players that were just the right players with just the right level of enthusiasm, that it was never really a problem to keep meeting consistently through the years? Were there times when the campaign almost fell apart just due to life stuff happening? Tell us a little bit about how you herded this group of adults into meeting. You said weekly, which is jaw dropping, for years.
It's a really good question, and if we look back at the kind of history of the cadence and how and where we would do this, I think we felt it's always been or for probably 25 or 26 of the last 27 years, it's been the kind of Monday night D&D game. Again, much of this is lost to history, and when I've got box files full of scrappy old paper, I do wish I'd kept a proper log of everything, because it would be an epic tome by now. But some things I have to dredge the memory a little bit for. We were probably playing weekly on Mondays, in the late 90s. The period I think where we played least frequently was perhaps 2 or 3 years, about 2001 through to 2003, where I was working away a lot. Where the game was anchored in the northwest of England, a little south of Manchester, where most of the players lived there or nearby. So there was a couple of times where we'd probably only be playing 8 to 10 times a year through that period. When I moved back more closely, most people were still around in the area. We fell into a pretty regular bi-weekly cadence where we'd play every other Monday, and with the occasional time when most people would be on vacation or unforeseen things. That probably meant that we were getting in a good 20, 22 sessions a year. So we did that bi-weekly up till COVID. I say most people were close-ish. I think I drove the furthest. I'd be driving 50 miles, and the guy would come across a similar distance. But that was all manageable. Everyone else was closer. And then, of course, COVID. And it was a real lifesaver for everyone. As I think you'll probably find a lot of people have told you in COVID to have that game. We moved it online. We play on Discord now. Works really well. D&D Beyond, again with 5th edition, has been a great help to that, making everyone's character sheets and dice rolls visible. Yeah. I would say that none of us have missed the kind of round the table dice falling on the floor and rolling into the sofa and pushing that bit at all. Yeah. But I think the convenience and the reliability of doing things on Discord, greatly outweighs all of that. We moved to weekly at the start of that COVID period, and we've kept it up on a weekly cadence ever since. It's quite a lift, obviously, for the DM who has to prepare most of the work, and that's actually let us put in what's now the 7th PC. There are 8 of us now in total.
Oh wow, okay.
But the fact we'd moved online and onto Discord through COVID meant we could bring in our most recent player. Mark, I say most recent. He's been with us 3 years. He lives further away. He wouldn't have been able to make it for in-person games on a Monday night, but he's just slotted straight into the group right now.
Do you think you'll ever go back to doing in person, or is this how you want to play games now going forward?
Well, I think we had all assumed, during that COVID period, that we would revert to, mostly in person, but it just never happened. And I think it never happened just because there's really no one's felt any kind of pressing need to do that.
That's fascinating. Yeah, because I think we for sure heard the opposite of that, like of people moving their campaigns online and then it just sort of fizzles because no one wants to play, or it's just like, we're going to put this on pause until we can get back in person too. So like that's very heartening to hear that it's working well for you. Going back to like the number of players that you said that you've had over the years, like when you meet weekly, is everybody there every week, or is there, sometimes you only have 4 players and you have to figure out something else to do?
Our general rule is that we'll play with one person missing. If we're already one person down and someone, as very occasionally happens, I say very occasionally, it is a stunningly reliable group of people generally. Yeah. But, there'll be, obviously with life and everything, there'll be the occasional last minute dropout. So it doesn't really hurt us too much to go ahead. 2 people short. Kind of depends where you are in the campaign. as well. There are, I would say, perhaps 2 or 3 times a year, certainly with the big story arc that we finished last year. There were times when obviously you would have to have, or you would very much want to have everyone there for their own sake.
Oh yeah.
You play through a world-shattering story arc. The last thing you want to do is go have to visit your aunt and come back and find out that the world has either been saved or destroyed,
Yes,
and someone did the dice wrong for you and you've missed it. So
yeah. So so we rolled on the table before we started this conversation, and so you rolled the topic of do you require your players to read the rules? And I think this is a really interesting question, I think, for you specifically, right? Because you're transitioning to 5th edition. So did you require everybody to go out and buy the books?
in short, no. We
Okay.
like to be inclusive. Really, the player base runs the gamut from really serious D&D enthusiasts who've got all the books, through to people who enjoy the game and enjoy the friendship group, but would never play if they didn't, or have never played and would never play if they didn't play with this particular group of people.
Yeah.
There's always perhaps a little bit of tension, and I'm sure healthy tension, but I'm sure some DMs probably wish their players didn't read quite as many rules as they could, because someone who doesn't know what a saving throw is or how to roll for damage obviously isn't going to enjoy the game. We don't have anyone like this, but you hear other DMs and other players talk. Someone who has a rules lawyer hectoring the DM and telling them what will happen and what should have happened. That's no fun either, and luckily we don't have anyone in either of those categories. It is genuinely interesting after the game. People will pop up all week in the Discord channel saying, "Oh, I know we're in this situation. I think we need to forage, and I think looking at the rules, this is our best strategy and this is our best chance." And
Oh, that sounds great.
all in all, you don't need the players to read the rules. If some have a kind of deeper knowledge and understanding of the mechanics, I think you can generally, as in this case, turn that to a positive.
When you changed rule systems, was that because the new system was out there and it looked cool and appealing? Was there a sense that you had maybe seen everything that the old rule system had to offer and were ready for something new? What went into that decision? And was that you saying, I'm sick of running 2nd edition, 3rd edition looks more fun for me? Did that come from the players?
So that was the move from 3.5 to 5. I think it was raised by some of the players, and we had a really quite long and very very healthy debate about it. Some people were not at all keen, and some were very very enthusiastic for it. I think everyone's reasonably happy with where we ended up in the end. Certainly, from my perspective, my challenge was that that kind of 12th, 13th, 14th level. It's kind of okay for big epic fantasy, traveling through planes and other realities kind of game. But when everything is anchored in one world, it's really difficult to make a believable, inhabitable, playable game world where the players can have some reasonable expectation of being afraid that the city watch in a new city
Right.
might have got the wrong idea about them and might catch them. Now, there's only so far you can ask them to suspend their disbelief and behave like someone really would, when they could, eliminate all of the city watch and their watch house with a wave of their hand. Which is, one of the reasons why, after the big epic cataclysmic storyline, which I think did make good use of that kind of level, we went for the reset back to first level. I think I've not played obviously 5e at the higher levels, but I get the impression that the kind of ramp up in power as you go up the levels is a bit less extreme. Might actually be a little bit disappointed in that it certainly seems to me, as you go up the kind of mid 5, 6, 7 levels in 5e, it seems like you're almost getting nothing for your level.
The 5th edition games that I've run, there definitely does feel like there's a few levels in there for every class that's just I don't know, just doesn't sort of do anything anything for you, unless your GM is really leaning into specific rules and stuff. I mean, I think the rogue in particular is somewhat boring until you hit 3rd level, but I mean, I do think it's rewarding as you go through. And I know for me personally, once they start edging up to around even just past level 5, you're right on. It's just like they can sort of handle a lot of normal person stuff without needing to think about it, such that it becomes a different game almost entirely. Yeah.
It makes me think about, one of the differences between kind of the D&D fantasy and other types of fantasy you find in books and movies. I'm thinking about you running your campaign world. You designed this campaign world anticipating that it would be explored by first and second and third level characters. And D&D is a game where, in a lot of ways, if you want to keep using all the rules of the game, the setting has to level up with your players, because at a certain power level, as we've discussed several times, people can start visiting other planes at will. Did you think about other planes when you did your system? And it's just an interesting difference. By the end of Lord of the Rings, Frodo isn't level 20 and he can't teleport around and that sort of thing. He's leveled up certainly in a lot of narrative ways, but in D&D, I feel like as GM, you would kind of always having to be looking ahead, say like, what level of power are my players about to enter into, and what needs to change about my campaign world to accommodate it. Or did you find that was an issue?
Yeah, I mean that has been a challenge, as I was saying, which I think did push the game, kind of in the direction of a big kind of a Ragnarok type confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of why you did that confrontation? You're just like, I've hit the point where my setting won't make sense or it won't be fun for me with this level of PCs roaming around.
Yeah, I certainly think it made sense for there's a lot of kind of big story arcs and mythology and backstory going on in the game, and it obviously made sense that the players at that level would be part of it. We don't do a great deal of extra planar stuff. That's not been a huge part of the campaign. I have, for whatever reason, and I found this quite useful, done quite a bit of time travel, I suppose,
interesting.
For better terms. So we've had the party thrown into the kind of primordial past. One piece I really enjoyed, where they went into the future, or they went into a possible future.
Oh, that's cool.
This was really in the build up to this kind of big kind of confrontational end of the elves battle, but they kind of had to go into the predictions, the premonitions of someone who had a premonition that they would be the last elf. It was called, that whole thread, and the characters had to go forward into his mind, see the post-apocalyptic world where everyone had been destroyed, everything new was in ruins, and there were just a few tribes of cannibalistic feral hobbits roaming the shattered landscape to retrieve the necessary information to come back and try and stop that happening, which, spoiler alert, they eventually did.
Yay.
Excellent. So, that brings up kind of a companion question I have. You've talked a lot about story arcs, and Chris, you have not run like a nearly 30-year campaign of D&D, but I would like to hear what your thoughts on this too. Pacing wise, how long does it take to go through kind of what you would consider a coherent story arc? I don't know if like each of your individual PCs has their own arc that they're following, or if it's more of the thing that the group as a whole is kind of on a trajectory. Yeah. But you've mentioned story arcs. So is that like a 6-month experience? Is that a 5 years from when this story started to when it was resolved experience? Tell me a little bit about how you pace your stories and your sub-stories.
Gosh, so I don't think there's any kind of deliberate planning of I would expect this to be a 6-month arc or a 1-year arc or something. I did surprise myself. I think I was looking back through some old notes, and I found things dated from 4 years previously, which had been at the start of the really big climactic part of the last.
So the seeds were there, years in advance.
The seeds were there years in advance. So I think we did have really a kind of it was almost the kind of 18 months of build up to the big finale, halfway through Return of the King, and then a kind of 18-month wind down, following up the loose ends, resolving the story threads, and then with a bit of a surprise moment at the end, which is when we dropped everyone knew it was coming, of course, but when we says, right, wow, that's happened, good grief, pull the lever, campaign ends, that's where your characters are, that's where they stayed.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to them after that is really for your guys' storytelling imagination, and a lot of the guys have come up with fantastic little stories about how their characters lived out the rest of their lives after that. But yeah, it is amazing that a story arc can last literally 4 or 5 years. I think if you, or certainly if I was actively thinking like the decisions I make and the information I give and the direction I set in tonight's campaign had better be good enough to be worthwhile in 5 years' time, I'd probably be too nervous to do it. So it's perhaps a good job you don't think that's quite that far ahead.
Well, maybe it's a personality thing, but so I have, for how many months are we into the year? 4 months? 4 or 5 months.
Five.
So I've been running a more or less weekly game of Call of Cthulhu for that time period, and it's wonderful. It's going great. But by month 2.5, I was like, this is really fun. Also, look at all these other games I want to run. Like, wouldn't it be more fun if we were playing this other game? All that to say, have you gone through phases where you were just like, I am bored of this setting in this campaign? And did you just power through that? Because obviously you did not do what I would do, which is like, guys, this is going great. The last 2 months have been great. Let's all switch. We're now playing Mech Warrior or something instead.
That's a great question, actually, and it's interesting that you kind of raise Call of Cthulhu as an example. I did run a Call of Cthulhu campaign like in high school, so that was one of the few things I've ever done for more than a session or two that wasn't D&D.
Yeah,
games like that, which have a very specific setting and mythos, can be great games. I think for a very long-term sustainable campaign, I'm almost going to use the word vanilla, and I'm not using it in the derogatory sense. I think D&D as a kind of default, non-wacky, almost generic, and it's in many ways it's of course the generic medieval fantasy game setting because it invented it, but a very kind of generic, recognizable world. And again, the world, and then the world you build on top of that rules. I've found, obviously, it's got its. I like to think, its quirks and its depth and its own mythology and its unique things and its interesting bits. But I do think that a kind of almost general generic-ish fantasy world where dwarves are little and fierce and like to mime and sing, and elves are mysterious and ethereal, and naughty hobbits like to steal things. All of that stuff people are familiar with and expect kind of gives you a base that you can then build your layers on top of without people having to constantly get used to or deal with the novelty of the fact that it's a specialist or a unique or wacky world setting. So in many ways, I think with games like Cthulhu and with settings which would be particularly removed from the standard medieval fantasy.
Yeah,
it's almost like people are playing the world instead of playing the character and playing the story inside the world. So I think that kind of, I was going to say not interesting. I'm struggling to find the right words. If you kind of call it general and generic and vanilla, it makes it sound boring. But I think you know what I'm saying, though.
Yeah, it's a kind of a shared vocabulary.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of genericness. I can see that making it easier to go off in almost any direction you need to for the story. Whereas something like Call of Cthulhu, you are kind of locked into a general setting and theme. And Cthulhu is probably a bad example because everything has been Cthulhuized in the last 20 years. But Chris, you've run some D&D games that went for a while. Did you have that experience, as well? Did you find yourself getting bored with those kind of quote generic, it's a world of dwarves and elves and hobbits stuff? Or did you experience what Bryn's talking about, where those building blocks lent themselves to be put together in lots of different combinations?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'll ever get bored with it. I mean, as I've stated on the podcast before, I'm just so into fantasy nonsense that you just give me that generic setting, I'll be happy as a clam, right? Because there's a hobbit, that's great, right? So for me, that's never been the problem. The problem, for me, always will come down to mechanics or something, right? Where it's just okay, I don't want to do this part of the game system, so like let's just jump over it, right? Like I'm sick of travel sequences. We're no longer going to do those sorts of things. Yeah. So or like the story is sort of, you know, wrapping up. Brenda, your point, like sometimes you're like, okay, we got to wrap this story up or wrap up this arc, and you're like, okay, this will take 2 sessions, then it takes 6 months, right? to get done with it, right? Like, so that's for sure happened to me too. But I mean, I sort of just love that, like that default vanilla setting, you know, and two, for bringing in new players, then you don't have to explain like your own mythology. It's just sort of like, well, have you seen Lord of the Rings? Okay, it's sort of like that, so you can just go from there.
No, I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
And I had to say, you know, obviously, Bryn, you've got enthusiastic players. I mean, the glimpses we've got at your players make me just madly jealous. You know, you have players that are actively scheming and plotting in between sessions, you know, of what they want to do next and how they're going to do that. I think players like that would, you know, I'd run anything for players like that, honestly.
I'm extremely lucky and privileged to have that group. I really am.
All right. Well, we should wrap up our conversation here. This has been so good, Bryn. Thank you for sharing. Just about your campaign and like how you go about it and stuff. Like this is really inspiring stuff, I think. Right. So this podcast is targeted to GMs, and I think everybody's going to have that twinge of jealousy, but then also sort of take some some lessons from you too. But yeah, I guess before we wrap up, do you have any sort of like closing thoughts? I guess. Like what's are there like any details from your campaign setting that you're like, this is fun, everybody should steal this idea? Anything like that? Any NPCs or locations?
Oh gosh, so I think the one thing I think I most enjoy, and I think the players enjoy, perhaps they're being polite, is that I like to, as I say, it's a city, often a city-based campaign. You know, the players are expected to live in one of the big cities and travel between the cities and do stuff on the way. But I take great pleasure in producing mock-up newspapers, which are published in the city. So the kind of anchor city of the campaign, Gravisport, has one. A newspaper called the Fiery Orb, which is a comical medievalism of the sun, which is a well-known down-market British newspaper. And it lets me, you know, indulge a captive audience to do terrible comedy stories. Yes. It's also actually a fantastic way. You just think, you know, double page of letter, you can put 5 or 6 or 7, you know, different plot hooks in there. Not have to rely on the party meeting mysterious old men in taverns. but really just and throw, particularly if they're going to a new city too, you know, just throw detail and context and jokes and clues and hints and things they might want to go and explore. So yeah, my one hint, keep a game interesting and fresh, is to make sure you expose the players to the news and the newspapers in the cities they go to. That's always fun.
That sounds so fun, but I gotta know, about how many old men in taverns do you think they've interacted with in the last 20-something?
Probably quite a lot, even so.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Well, Chris and I are both big fans of like kind of cool physical props and stuff. So the idea of like a newsletter, a newspaper or something sounds extra fun. I enjoy handing out like handouts in Call of Cthulhu, you know, just little tiny snippets, but giving people something to like read through and digest is really appealing to me.
That's always one of the most enjoyable parts of the planning for me. So yeah.
I have to say, you know, listening to you, Bryn, one of the things I've taken away is it sounds like a big part of just making this happen and then stick together was reaching that point where every Monday night we do this, or every other Monday. It kind of gets lodged in people's mind as something they can count on happening, and that they can plan around it. So you're not doing that scheduling dance between, when can we meet next? Oh, I can't make Tuesdays, but I could make Thursdays, you know, just as I think about my GMing plans for later this year, you know, that is encouraging me to like lean into kind of making it a recurring event that people can count on, and not a special thing that has to be negotiated continually.
Yes, I think that's probably the secret to our longevity.
Yes.
All right, we figured it out. Awesome. Yeah. The podcast is done, Chris. Our mission accomplished.
That's great. All right. Well, I think that'll do it for us here. Roll for Topic is part of the Roll for It Media podcasting network. Our sister show, The Splat Book, with John Corey and Kyle Latino, is excellent. You can go find them at thesplatbook.com. It's one of my favorite podcasts, and I'm not just saying that just because I like John and Kyle outside of their podcast. It's really good. I just love their sort of their thoughts and their ruminations about running games and like what makes them special and all that. So go check it out. But I think that does it for us. Again, thank you, Bryn, so much for coming on.
Thank you, guys.
Truly wonderful.
What a delight to hear about your campaign.
Really enjoyed it, guys. Great to meet you. Really appreciate it. And you've won a listener in me as well. I've listened to
good.
Obviously a few of these in preparation, and I'm going to listen to the backlog, and I'm going to subscribe from now on. So keep up the good work.
Thanks,
this is how we build our listener base.
Yes, one by one.
One at a time by inviting them on the show.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I've been Chris Salzman.
I've been Andy Rao.
And remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.